and welcome to Andy Dennert's Reality Blurred. I'm the aforementioned Andy, the creator of Reality Blurred, and a writer who believes in the power of true stories. Every week I'll take you behind the scenes of reality TV and my writing. On today's show, a dramatic reading of a legal document that a big entertainment corporation didn't want you to read, and part of a once secret testimony that was about my work. Also, recommendations for classic reality TV, a new classic, and some software. And stick around to the end for life advice from TV, this time from Bad Bunny's pre-Super Bowl viral moment. Welcome. Let's start with how I wrote that, where I share insight into my process as a writer, blogger, journalist, and critic, and today, the subject of a story I wrote. It's very unusual where I write a story that is about me. Of course, I write about myself, and what I think about shows and all the time, and I do interviews with people and I talk to them. But in this case, I was reporting on something that involved me that I had no idea actually involved me. I will link to this story that I wrote and published last week in the show notes in the episode description of your podcast app. So I encourage you to go read that because that has the full story, the full timeline, the full narrative. But just for the sake of what I'm about to share here, the very brief version is that in the fall of 2022, I interviewed Marcus Lemonis, star of The Prophet, a show that aired 8 seasons on CNBC. I asked him if the show was coming back for a 9th season, and I also asked him about the show's contract. Now, the show was basically like Kitchen Nightmares, where a person who knows their shit goes into a business and gives some advice and tries to help out. But unlike Gordon Ramsay, Marcus didn't just go in and yell at people and then leave after his crew painted over their store or whatever. Instead, the twist on The Prophet was that Marcus, if he likes the business, like the products, like the people, all of it, would actually invest in that business and help it succeed. That was kind of an amazing twist. I really liked the show. I interviewed Marcus many times. There were some fun spin-offs and specials of the show. Really great kind of breaking the fourth wall, repeat series with Marcus talking to the show's showrunner. Anyway, after the 8th season, it didn't seem like it was coming back, so I asked him about that. And I also asked him in an interview that I asked him to do with me about the show's contract, which I had obtained as part of some legal action that was happening around the show. I asked him about that because while it has some very basic reality TV stuff in there about how producers can make people look bad and fictionalize them and et cetera, it also had language about the deals being, quote, simulated investments, end quote, and also that they used, quote, a prop check, end quote. So when Marcus pulled out his actual personal checkbook and wrote a check to the business owners, they actually just took that back after the camera stopped rolling, and it was, all for TV, essentially. So that really didn't, fit with what I thought the show was about and the way that Marcus Lemonis talked to me and other people about the show and even was on TV. He was all about, this is real, this is not reality TV, this is not bullshit, this is like the real thing. So I asked him about all that and asked him if the show was coming back and asked him if the lawsuits against him and the show were having any effect on its future. That's because there were a bunch of different cases going on. There were people suing him. Recently, there was a lawsuit that had been going on for several years. And a year before, we learned that about half of the companies featured on The Prophet had a dispute with him where they were, I think, planning to sue, but they actually never did. I didn't know that when I talked to him a year and a couple of months later. And the reason I didn't know that is because a long time before I interviewed him, Marcus Lemonis, NBCUniversal, CNBC, the show's production company, settled with all of those companies, and that settlement was secret. So none of them talked about it. There were no press releases. There were no court documents because it was happening in arbitration proceedings. So I had no idea at this point, but I asked him about it anyway. It turns out that what he said there was read by a lot of the people who were actually party to that settlement agreement, and they thought that he violated their settlement agreement in what he said in the interview with me. So their lawyer contacted him, and then he actually instituted or started, or I don't know what the verb is, arbitration proceedings, basically asking for permission to talk like he did in the interview that I gave. All of that was heard by a judge over a week, an arbitrator who was a retired judge over a week last May in 2025. And then there were some things that happened over the summer. And in November, the judge made his decision. And that decision was that Marcus Lemonis owed every single one of the challengers, 48 people, or sorry, 47 people. There was a 48, but that person didn't get paid. 47 people, he owed them $100,000 each for what he said in my interview. So that's $4.7 million. And there were 2 videos on YouTube where he said similar things about companies on the profit. And they also were awarded $100,000 for each of those. So a total of, I think, $14.1 million. They say that he didn't pay in the 30 days that he had to pay. So at the beginning of this year, in 2026, we found out about all of this because they challenged this in court in New York. And that made all of these documents public, which is amazing. So I mentioned this earlier in January on my podcast, but I went through these documents, I annotated them. The testimony is like 1,400 pages long. All of these people who were involved in this, all the companies and the owners, people who were featured on The Prophet, gave testimony, talked about how the Prophet affected them and how they felt when they read his interview with me, in which he said things about businesses that appeared on the show, and also talked about people who were challenging him legally and said things like, and this is the paragraph that was at dispute. Quote, this is Marcus Lemonis speaking. What's most upsetting for me is that I spent almost a decade of my life, and to have people pursue greed over what's right, I think that is more sad and disappointing to me than anything. And if they end up picking up 100 grand or 50 grand of what I call nuisance money, because that's usually what happens, as you know, they still have to pay income tax on it and they still have to live with themselves. So the judge basically said that that did in fact refer to the people he'd settled with, the people who were paid. Marcus didn't actually pay them in the settlement agreement. It was the NBCUniversal subsidiaries who ended up paying the fines, but Marcus was a party to this and actually signed the documents. You can look at all these documents as part of my story on Reality Blurred. I have them all. You can search them. You can look at my notes and annotations. They're all there for you to look at. So I just wanted to read the kind of stuff that was at issue here because I know a lot of people are going to go through the court documents themselves, but I find parts of them so fascinating, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of them. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. As a little aside, you may or may not have known that I did improv for nearly a decade, took a bunch of classes, joined an ensemble, performed a couple times a month, started hosting shows. It was just wonderful. Improv is one of those things that works in person and you can't really talk about because it makes no sense outside of actually seeing a show. So I'm not going to be one of those person who tries to make you understand or love improv for me talking about it. Quick editor's note here in the middle that I'm recording after the fact. Listening back to this while I was putting in the music at the beginning and the end, I realized that I did not mention the most important part about my improv journey, which is that although I had a tremendous amount of fun on stage, I was absolutely terrible at doing any kind of character voices. So I am doing that nevertheless because it is fun and I like to just throw a little bit of joy into my own life and hopefully into yours. So recording this episode gave me newfound appreciation for the Watch What Crappens boys and their ability to inhabit all of these Bravo characters. And just to make sure that this is clear, none of this is to minimize any of the damage that has been done by the show or by all of the legal proceedings that we're discussing here. I'm just trying to make it an entertaining listen for you all. Okay, back to the actual recording. I'm going to try to take on some characters here. So just for the sake of you hopefully being entertained by this, and so it doesn't just sound like boring legal stuff, and also so we can differentiate between what I'm reading because this is audio. So the first thing is a document titled Confidential Settlement Agreement and Release. This is between what is described as the NBC parties, NBCUniversal, all their companies, the Machete parties, which is the production company, and the Lemonis parties, which is all of his businesses, and also the claimants, all these businesses. Okay, so I am reading to you from Section 4, titled Confidentiality and Non-Disparagement, and this is Section 4.1. Because this is a confidentiality agreement, I'm going to read this in the style of someone in the library trying to make someone understand something, but not trying to get in trouble for talking too loudly. The parties and their undersigned counsel shall keep the existence and terms of this agreement in the strictest confidence and shall not disclose the terms or effect of this agreement to anyone other than in compliance with this agreement, as it may be required by law or regulation. There shall be no press release or other public statement issued by any party in connection with this agreement. Any inquiry concerning the subject matter of this agreement or the claims and matters hereunder shall be responded to with, quote, no comment or not at all. So that's one of the things that was at issue in this arbitration, because Marcus Lemonis didn't say no comment when I asked him about lawsuits, and the judge decided that I was talking about this settlement, and he claimed that he was talking about every business, not just the ones that were involved. Now we're going to go to section 4.4. Now we're going to go to section 4.4, and I'm going to skip a little ahead in the paragraph, so I don't have to do that voice for too long. So basically it starts with the parties and lists them all out, and then says, agree that they will not make any disparaging comments about one another, or make any comments that could portray any of the Lemonis parties or the claimant parties in a negative light in connection with the television show The Prophet, including, without limitation, the making of that show and the business negotiations and transactions that may have occurred as part of or after and related in any way to that show. So as you can see, basically this agreement was saying no one can even talk about the fact that this settlement happened. Can't talk about the fact that it even exists. Basically, a pretty short legal document, relatively speaking. This is, let's see, I'm just scrolling through it right now. My cat is sitting on my hand, which is really helping me scroll. It's 9 pages, and then pages 10 through 76 are all signatures, and pages that sort of list out the parties. So it's a lot of people who've signed and were listed. So that's what was that question, this secret agreement. And what's really interesting is the central idea in this arbitration that occurred last year is that they didn't want any of this public, like they didn't want bad publicity. And so, of course, where are we now? We're getting bad publicity because we tried to keep this secret, which is that not what always happens. Now we're going to go on to the testimony. There's 1,478 pages in the PDF that I am looking at. I'm going to start at the very beginning here, where Marcus Lemonis's lawyer, who is identified as Mr. Swibel or Swibel, S-W-I-B-E-L. I don't know who this person is. I've never seen them in my life. I have no idea what they sound like. I'm just going to read to you from the transcript in a different voice so you know that it's not the previous voice. But he starts out, I assume he's a he based on the Mr., starts off and talking to the judge, and of course this is being all transcribed, about what happens here in this case. Again, no idea what this person is. This is just for entertainment and also, again, so you can keep all these people separate. So start with what got us here after the settlement agreement. Well, after a year after the settlement agreement was executed, Mr. Lemonis gave an interview to an obscure blog about reality TV. We have got an image on the screen. This is Exhibit J2. Reality Blurred was the name of the blog, and you'll see that it got very little pickup. 3 comments posted, and here they are just to give you context of how impactful this blog post was. Number 1, quote, I like the in-depth blob post and the fact that you read actual contract. Read the actual contract and posted the link. Sorry, I've slipped into a completely different accent. I like Marcus Lemonis a lot, so I really wanted to read feedback from others reading what you posted. Nice work, end quote. And then somebody criticizing the professional writing of the author, and then the snarky response by the author about the criticism. This is why we are here. This is the reaction to the blog post. This was a nothing murder, Your Honor. Actually says murder. I don't know if that's a typo or if he said murder or that's what the transcription has turned. You see it here when they posted on Facebook, it got 9 looks. It says looks. The point is that this is not, and now here we have the judge. You said 9 hits? Now, I don't want to do the judge and also a southern accent, sorry. The judge, I guess I'm going to do the judge as like a, he's retired, so I'm going to do him as like a retired Floridian. You said 9 hits? 9 what? Why am I doing the same accent? Okay, whatever. You said 9 hits? 9 what? You see the bottom of the screen? See there? There's a little thumbs up. Yes? 9 people. Wow, okay. In that post, when we go back, I'm going to read it again, but this time in this title, Mr. Mackey from South Park. This is the judge. You said 9 hits? No, I can't do Mr. Mackey, and I can't do 2 characters at once. How do people do this? Okay, you said 9 hits, 9 what? You see the bottom of the screen? See where there's a little thumbs up? Yes. 9 people. Wow, okay. In that post, you see from Reality Blurred, and I'm going to get into this more, but I just want a preview for you. It talks about when the judge. Okay, you said ups before? 9 ups? Okay, likes. Okay, yeah, okay, no problem. They're talking about likes. Back to the lawyer. He says, will there be more episodes of The Prophet or is it cancelled? This is the blog post author. What does Marcus Lemonis think about the companies who are suing him? What does the Prophet's contract say? Marcus Lemonis answered my questions about all 3. Those are the questions that were asked. Okay, I'm going to stop that. I don't know what that accent was. Probably just, okay. So that's the beginning, and we go on to Marcus Lemonis' testimony, and there's all kinds of really funny stuff in here that I mentioned in my article. So, for example, the opposing attorney asks Marcus, basically is trying to figure out how the interview got scheduled and like whether he searched his emails and his texts to figure out if I contacted him. And he says, I candidly do not recall. And the lawyer says, did you just run into him in a grocery store? And Marcus Lemonis says, I have actually only met him once. And the person says, was it for this interview? And he says, no. And anyway, so like, this is one of my favorite parts. The lawyer, again, sort of on the side of the people who are, in this case, they're called the respondents, but they're the companies that were, settled with Marcus Lemonis and the Prophet. That lawyer says, would you have reached out to him and asked him to interview you? And Marcus says, definitely not. Okay, try not to let that hurt my feelings. Anyway, it doesn't really hurt my feelings. It's just funny. It's so interesting to read all of this, probably more so to me because it's about my piece and they're just going through bit by bit, question by question. And Marcus is basically saying, I didn't mention any of the companies in the settlement. That's the thing that happens with every single company too. Like when they talk, or a person who owned one of the companies, they basically say like, I was on the Prophet. Here's what happened. Here's what I thought when I read that article. I thought it was about me for these reasons, or I felt really awful that he was talking about us again. And then the opposing counsel for Marcus Lemonis comes in and says, were you mentioned by name? Was your company mentioned by name? Was the agreement mentioned? And they all say no. And then that's the end of it. So it's a lot of that, like 1,400 pages of it. But I also think it's important, like if you want to read it, because you can see the people who were featured on the show, what they experienced, because they talk about it in detail. Finally, and then we will end this exercise, I just want to read a brief part of the decision on respondents' counterclaimants' motion to strike claimants' damages calculation and corrected final award. It's basically the arbitration judge or the arbitrator, the judge, retired judge, who is the arbitrator. All of this stuff is a lot to keep track of. This is one of the reasons why it took me so long to write this story, is because I wanted to get all of it right in print. And so here I am talking about it kind of off the cuff. And it's like, no, wait, this is the thing, So it's very complicated reading all these legal documents and kind of tracing how all of this goes. Anyway, the retired judge, who was the arbitrator, wrote this long document about exactly, it's 98 pages, giving his decision, as I said before, the financial thing. But he says this in the middle of it on page 87, and I just thought that was worth a read. So once again, Mr. Mackey from South Park voice, just to get the judge here. I think I have to say that okay in order to get into character. Okay. Lemonis' disdain for the respondents, complete disregard to his obligations in the settlement agreement, and apparent lack of concern for the harm suffered by respondents were all put on full display during the arbitration hearing. His voice is terrible. Given not only Lemonis' serial and serious breaches, but his willingness to do so in front of audiences, on camera, and during recorded and published interviews, there is every reason to believe that Lemonis will continue to breach in such fashion absent the requested declaration. So this is one part of his decision, and he's basically saying that Marcus Lemonis had disdain for the people involved in the settlement and complete disregard for his obligations in that agreement, so was not convinced by any of the arguments. Anyway, just a fascinating thing overall. I hope you read the actual story and also maybe some of the documents and, see what happens on a reality TV show, or at least after it, now that we have some of this publicly. Okay, on to recommendations where I share some things that are bringing joy and entertainment into my life. First up, Survivor repeats. Survivor is coming up with season 50 at the end of this month. CBS is repeating 10 episodes from the show's past. Unfortunately, none of the early seasons. They started with Survivor Micronesia, fans versus favorites, and just are moving on from there. But some of these are pretty great episodes of Survivor, even from the new era or the later years. And it's basically counter-programming to the Olympics. So you can check out the schedule. I will link that in the show notes episode description here as well, as you can see that. And I'm also sharing on Reality Blurred and elsewhere links to things that kind of give some background and context. For example, the first episode was the one where Eric gives up immunity. And I interviewed Eric about that last summer and just asked him sort of how that moment about sort of being declared the dumbest survivor ever or making the dumbest decision in survivor history affected his life, affects him to this day. And it was a really fascinating conversation. The next thing I'd probably don't have to recommend, because you've probably already seen it, it's Bad Bunny's halftime show from the Super Bowl, which was just absolutely incredible. I wasn't familiar with most of the songs that he sung, and I don't speak fluent Spanish, but the production was absolutely incredible, and that didn't matter to me in any way. Plus, when I listen to music sung in English, I don't know what someone's saying half the time anyways. Just the staging of it alone is worth watching because the camera operators are right there in among dancers and in front of him singing and in front of the guest, Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin. Just unlike any kind of Super Bowl show I've seen before in terms of the way it was shot and filmed. And there's a really cool thing that I will also link to so you can see. Basically, there's, the set, quote unquote, was all these parts of Puerto Rico. They start in sugarcane fields, and all of the sugarcane that sort of surrounds all of these set pieces in the halftime show were actually people in costumes that were cast for this. They ran onto the field, stood in their assigned place, and then ran off the field. That's how they managed to get all of that stuff there without, a bunch of equipment, machinery, other stuff that they needed to put down on the grass. So pretty incredible. By the way, you should watch this because the racists got so mad. Their racism came out, and Jill Zarin from The Real Housewives of New York City was one of those people, and her rant about the Super Bowl halftime show got her fired from her new reality show called The Golden Life, which was basically a reunion of all the Real Housewives of New York City early cast members. So hasn't started filming, obviously, so they've let her go. So finally, a piece of software, Free Text USA. I always love to recommend this at tax time here in the United States. Free Text USA is basically a way to do your taxes online. It is just like TurboTax, except it is actually much easier and better to use as far as I'm concerned. And it's actually free. Those of us who are freelancers or have complicated taxes like Schedule Cs, all of that is free too. Like with TurboTax, I used to pay more than $100 a year just to type some numbers in because I had that kind of business. And Free Text USA, such a pleasure to use, works perfectly. I actually, the first year I did it in both software to make sure that it worked. And while Free Text USA sounds kind of scammy in its title, it is 100% legit, so check it out. Okay, that's everything for today. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to send me your feedback, questions, and thoughts. And if you're in a 5-star mood, tap those in your podcast app of choice. That really does help other people find this. Our theme song is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod, and this episode is by me, Andy Dennert, and is copyright 2026 by Reality Blurred LLC, which is also me. You can find me at realityblurred.com and andydennert.com. I'll leave you today with life advice from TV, this time from Bad Bunny, who said the following while accepting one of his 2026 Grammys, and it's excellent advice for us all.
Also, I want to say to the people, I know it's tough to not to hate on these days, and I was thinking sometime we get contaminados. I don't know how to say that in English. The hate get more powerful with more hate. The only thing that is more powerful than hate is love. So, please, we need to be different. If we fight, we have to do it with love. We don't hate them. We love our people, we love our family, and that's the way to do it, with love. Don't forget that, please.